Welcome to Power, Policy, and Progress, the podcast where politics, policy, and the story shaping our future take center stage. I'm Madison Maynard, and today we are going to talk about the White House's mass deportation surge, where back to back fatal shootings by federal agents have left two innocent men dead, and local communities demanding answers. Then we look at Washington, which says goodbye to Senator Lindsey Graham. But as the political world looks back on his decades in power, we examine the heavy cost of his sudden transformation into Donald Trump's ultimate defender. Meanwhile, a rare health update from Mitch McConnell leaves Senate Republicans shorthanded at the worst possible time. Then we'll dive into the data. With the midterms just 4 months away, the nation's top pollsters have reached a striking consensus. President Trump's cratering approval ratings and stubbornly high gas prices are setting up a massive Democratic takeover in the House, but there is still a red wall that stands in the way of the United States Senate. And finally, we will pivot to look at the heartbreaking and deeply suspicious death of 18-year-old Nolan Wells in Mississippi. His family is demanding answers, and as you'll hear, the official story simply does not add up. So we have a lot to unpack. Let's get right into it. So let's turn now to an explosive and rapidly escalating crisis surrounding the White House's mass deportation campaign. Over the last 7 days, two separate federal immigration operations have ended in fatal shootings. And in both cases, federal agents shot and killed the wrong person. The first tragedy unfolded in Houston, Texas. 52-year-old Lorenzo Araujo, a beloved father of three who had spent 35 years in the United States building a construction business, was driving to work in his van at dawn. Armed ICE agents who were searching for an entirely different man from Guatemala stopped the vehicle. Officials initially claimed that the man who was killed, Salgado Araujo, used his van as a weapon. But eyewitness accounts and a newly released video tells a completely different story. An agent approached the vehicle and fired a single lethal shot directly through the lower passenger window. The man's family was left to identify his body after recognizing his agony cries for help on a social media video that was filmed by a bystander. Then, a near identical horror occurred thousands of miles away in Biddeford, Maine. Agents monitoring an apartment complex shot and killed 26-year-old Colombian national Juan Sebastian Guerrero inside his car. Once again, Homeland Security Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen was forced to admit to lawmakers that the man killed was not the target that they were looking for. These deaths are part of a chilling pattern where ICE agents have opened fire on more than 20 people inside vehicles since September. Because ICE leadership explicitly refuses to deploy body cameras, local district attorneys say the federal government is maintaining a complete wall of silence, hiding the identities of the agents involved. In Maine, the political fallout has been instant. The tragedy has collided directly with the high stakes battle to replace Grant Plattner as Democratic candidates Troy Jackson and Dr. Naval Shah rushed to the scene to join furious protesters. They are fiercely pointing to Republican Senator Susan Collins' recent vote to hand ICE a $70 billion blank check without mandatory de-escalation guardrails. As daily immigration arrests skyrocket nationwide, these back-to-back killings have turned a hardline campaign promise into an unpredictable, lethal reality on the streets of America. And this is why it is so important for Democratic lawmakers to advocate for the abolition of ICE. This is why Democrats should not waver on this issue, especially with so many innocent lives being taken at the hands of ICE. There is absolutely no reason for ICE to be shooting at people. Even if they are dealing with an undocumented immigrant, they do not need to be approached with guns. They are human beings with human rights. But as we continue to see that ICE is killing people who are not even targets of their specific operations, we will continue to see more and more innocent lives taken. And it is absolutely unacceptable. ICE is too corrupt for reform, right? It is time to abolish ICE now and come up with a way better system to deal with those who are undocumented in a way that is not inhumane. So Democrats cannot waver from this, and Democrats who have not yet said that ICE needs to be abolished, they need to reconsider why they have not added that to their platform. If they are running for reelection, if they aren't even running for reelection, if they're, in the middle of their term, on every single Democrat lawmaker's platform, abolish ICE should be one of their policy platforms. It just has to be. And I do believe that it is a winning message, especially if you want to galvanize younger voters who identify more progressive, and if you want to galvanize independent voters who do not like what they're seeing right now with immigration, with this immigration crackdown. So, Democrat lawmakers, all of you need to come together and stand behind abolish ICE as a pivotal message for 2026, 2028, and for many elections to come. So let's move on. Washington is still reeling from the sudden passing of South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, who died Saturday at the age of 71 years old. While his allies are praising his decades of public service, Graham's death forces a hard look at a highly controversial legacy, one defined by a stunning surrender of principle in the pursuit of power. For years, Lindsey Graham was known as an institutionalist, a foreign policy hawk, and a loyal wingman to the late Senator John McCain. But to his critics, his modern legacy is defined by a complete political transformation. In 2015, during his own run for president, Graham didn't hold back. He publicly called Donald Trump a jackass, a kook, unfit for office, and a race baiting, xenophobic religious bigot. Those are Lindsey Graham's words in 2015. He warned that nominating Trump would destroy the Republican Party and that they would deserve it. Yet, almost overnight, Graham completely flipped to the other side, to the dark side, everyone. He became Trump's fiercest defender, a regular golf partner, and a key architect of the MAGA movement's takeover of the federal judiciary. Even after January 6th, when Graham briefly declared enough is enough, he quickly returned to the fold, proving that there was no line he wouldn't cross to stay close to the seat of power. Beyond his domestic flip-flops, Graham's hawkish foreign policy left a trail of devastating consequences. He was a fearless defender and cheerleader for permanent military occupation in Afghanistan and Iraq. And more recently, his extreme rhetoric sparked intense backlash, especially when he defended civilian casualties in Gaza by comparing the conflict to Hiroshima on steroids. Ultimately, Lindsey Graham leaves behind a deeply fractured country. He will likely be remembered not as the bipartisan dealmaker he claimed to be, but the ultimate political chameleon. A man who traded his closest personal friendships and his own core convictions just to remain in the room where it happens. So, my opinion on this is you can still pray for his family, for his loved one. Obviously, his death is tragic because he is a human being. And I pray for everyone who loses a loved one. I mean, 71 is young, in my opinion, right? He still had many years to go. And it is unfortunate that he passed away. However, that does not mean that we should romanticize his legacy. Lindsey Graham, like I've just laid out, was the ultimate lip flopper. But his eventual close ties to MAGA will and should taint his legacy, as well as his foreign policy stances. And that as well should, and I believe will, taint his legacy as well. He was a fierce supporter of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, which we know now were incredibly big mistake to get involved in both of those conflicts. And many, many, many innocent people lost their lives in those wars. And he has also supported Israel in their genocide of the Palestinians. Basically saying that, yeah, the civilian deaths in Gaza, oops, not that big of a deal. It needs to be done. Innocent people die, and Lindsey Graham turned a blind eye because he is a guy that supports military operations across the globe. He just was. And so many people are going to remember that when it comes to Lindsey Graham and how billions and billions of our taxpayer dollars went to these tragic conflicts, and his name will always be attached to that. So, of course, it's complicated, right? Obviously, it's sad that he passed away, but I don't agree with romanticizing his legacy. And I was very disappointed in many Democrats who ended up doing that, who ended up posting, oh, well, we may have disagreed, but what a lovely guy he was. I don't see the point in doing all of that. Just say we're praying for his family and his loved ones. There is no point in romanticizing his legacy and romanticizing his life. You know, I just don't see the point in that. You can pray for somebody and pray for their family and not completely say, hey, what an amazing guy Lindsey Graham was, even though he was a puppet for President Trump for 10 years, even after January 6th, where he said enough is enough, but then 5 seconds later, he's back on his knees bowing to President Trump. And let's just completely forget about his horrific foreign policy stances. So I don't believe we should erase all that just because he passed away. Obviously, it was the right thing to do for people to post after his death, especially those who worked alongside him in Congress. But I was disappointed in many Democrats who basically whitewashed his legacy and was like, it really wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad at all. That, I think, isn't necessary. So, we're going to see a lot more coverage on the news about Lindsey Graham. I mean, he was a very prominent Republican figure even before Trump. Like I said, he was a close ally to the late Senator John McCain. So he has been around for a long time. So we're going to see still on the news a lot of coverage of his passing, especially since it was so sudden. So we're going to continue to see that. Not surprising. And I don't think that's a bad thing either. But I just don't see the point in just lying about everything that he did that has hurt many, many Americans. So, speaking of Republican lawmakers, let's turn to Mitch McConnell. So, after nearly a month of intense speculation and total silence from his office, the 84-year-old Kentucky senator has finally provided an update on his health. Woo. amazing. Wow, I'm so happy. On Sunday, McConnell released a statement revealing that his June 14th hospitalization was a result of a fall at his home that left him briefly unconscious. Doctors have ruled out a heart attack, stroke, or concussion, though he did have to beat back a mild case of pneumonia while admitted. To quiet online rumors that he was incapacitated, his office released a photograph of a smiling McConnell alongside his wife, Elaine Chow, holding a Sunday newspaper. Addressing the weeks of secrecy, the senator admitted that people of his generation often hesitate to show the vulnerability of growing older. While McConnell has now moved to a rehabilitation center, his doctors have not cleared him to return to the Senate floor to vote. He insists he will finish out his term, which ends in January. But with the sudden passing of Senator Lindsey Graham, McConnell's prolonged absence leaves Senate Republicans down two critical votes just as the chamber returns to session. So at least now we know his condition, but it took them way too long to reveal any information about his health to the public. I believe that Americans have the right to know the physical and mental conditions of our lawmakers, our elected officials. And this is why I believe, me personally, that is why I believe that people over the age of 70 honestly shouldn't be running for office. They should not be running for office. They should not run for reelection past the age of 70 years old. And that's just my opinion. They should pass the torch to younger generations to avoid things like this from happening. And we don't know when McConnell will be able to return to the Senate floor. Even though he claims that he will finish out his term, who knows what the doctors will eventually say. However, with Lindsey Graham's passing and now with Mitch McConnell's absence, that takes away two critical Republican votes. And that's going to impact the party because Graham and McConnell's strong influence in Republican politics, I mean, that is something that we can't take away from either figure. So we will see how this impacts the party moving forward. So now let's move on to a New York Times survey, New York Times reporting that really caught my eye. So with the 2026 midterm elections now just 4 months away, it's crazy to say, the battle lines are officially drawn. A new New York Times survey gathering six of the country's top pollsters and political pundits revealed an absolute consensus on where this map is heading. If the election were held today, Democrats would recapture the House, but would fall short of taking the Senate. So let's look at the underlying economic and polling data driving the House projection. Forecasters note that midterms are almost always a referendum on the president, and right now the numbers are brutal for the White House. President Trump's overall approval rating has cratered to under 40%, weighed down heavily by gas prices sitting stubbornly near $4 a gallon. On the congressional ballot, Democrats have opened up a commanding 6-point lead. Data experts like Nate Silver and Charlotte Swayze argue that while post-2024 Republican redistricting will prevent the GOP from a total historic tsunami, a Democrat takeover of the 218 seats needed for a House majority is now highly likely. But the Senate is an entirely different beast. To seize the majority, Democrats need a net gain of 4 seats. And experts say that they are running straight into a red wall because modern elections are so tightly coupled with state partisanship. Democrats have to pull off miracles in deep red states like Ohio, where our former Senator Sherrod Brown is attempting a political comeback, or in Iowa and Texas. Compounding the Senate math is the sudden wreckage left behind in Maine. Pundits point out that the recent explosive collapse of progressive nominee Graham Plattner has left the party with zero reliable polling data for a replacement candidate. handing incumbent Susan Collins a massive structural advantage. Whether it is progressive candidates or more moderate candidates across the country, this midterm is shaping up to be a high stakes experiment. But as of right now, the data scientists agree. America is on a collision course for a deeply divided Washington come November. And if you have been following me and have been listening to the podcast, you know that I've said that it is crucial for Democrats to win both the House and the Senate to ensure checks and balances in Washington, D.C., which has been completely thrown out of the window during the second Trump administration. And the fact that Democrats blew it in Maine with Graham Plattner definitely does not help the Democratic Party. However, there are other critical states that Democrats need to win. For example, my home state, Ohio. And Ohio is a very critical race. And if Ohio goes blue and elects Sherrod Brown, which would be the best decision, that is a huge win for Democrats. Of course, another example is Texas. Thankfully, Ken Paxton is the Republican nominee, so it gives James Rico more of a chance of winning. However, it's still Texas, right? Which is a red state. And it's difficult for Democrats to win statewide in Texas. It is difficult for Democrats to win Texas in a presidential election. It is difficult to win as a Democrat in Texas unless you are running in certain districts in Texas, right? If Texas goes blue, that victory will not only help the Democratic Party, but it will destroy the Republican Party if they lose that Senate seat. And the race looks very close, and of course, we'll follow it closely on this show. There is a lot on the line this election cycle, and I think that Democrats, besides Graham Plattner, put up a lot of amazing candidates that at least have a chance of winning in a competitive seat. Democrats know what candidates to put in different districts and different states. So I think besides Graham Plattner, Democrats have been putting forth great candidates. I really do. So we'll continue to follow this. Midterms 4 months away. We're going to be on the edge of our seats following this. So now we're going to pivot from the national political stage to a story closer to home and one that absolutely demands our attention. There is a developing tragedy out of Mississippi that we have to talk about. The death of 18-year-old Nolan Wells. Nolan was a brilliant athlete, a Division I football prospect, and an incredibly strong swimmer. Just a normal young boy, right? Teenager. Not man, teenager. Okay. I don't like that people online are saying, man. Okay, was he a legal adult? Sure. But he was still a teenager. So on the 4th of July, he went out on a boat to Horn Island with 3 high school friends. Out of that group, Nolan was the only black teen. The rest of his friends were white. 2 days later, his body was found in the water. While local authorities have been quick to suggest that this was just a tragic drowning with no foul play, Nolan's family and renowned civil rights attorney Ben Crump are saying, hold on. The story being told simply does not add up. The biggest red flag centers around Nolan's cell phone. His friends returned to the mainland without him, leaving him behind on the island, but somehow they had his keys and his phone in their possession. Think about that. What teenager willingly chooses to stay stranded on a barrier island, but hands over their phone and keys to the people that are leaving that island? It makes 0 sense. And to make matters even more unsettling, when they tracked his family, when they tracked the phone via Life 360 and finally got back, they discovered that his Snapchat history from that day was completely wiped and texts have been deleted. For a kid who constantly documented his life, a completely blank digital trail is completely alarming. Then look at the glaring contradictions in the witness statements. A young woman on the island told investigators that Nolan explicitly said he was heading back to the boat to go home with his friends. Yet those exact friends claim Nolan told them he wanted to stay behind on the island with that girl. Both of these things can't be true. Someone is lying. Nola's family has understandably refused to let this just be swept under the rug. Supported by Colin Kaepernick, they've commissioned an independent autopsy in Washington, D.C., completely bypassing local Mississippi law enforcement. History has taught us that when Black children die under highly questionable circumstances, especially in the Deep South, true accountability is rarely volunteered. It has to be fought for. We need a fully transparent investigation. Nolan Wells deserves a future, and his family deserves justice and deserves the absolute truth of what happened on that island. It's been absolutely heartbreaking to see Nolan's friends share pictures and videos of him on social media. I've been seeing that a lot come up on my feed because a lot of prominent people are reposting those posts. So I've been seeing a lot of posts from Nolan's friends. He was truly loved by so many people, and the day he passed away, it seems to me that he was surrounded by people who didn't love him at all. And I am eager to receive more details and to learn more about what actually happened on the island because there are a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of conflicting stories. And I'm so happy that people are coming together to support Nolan's family because they want to see justice for the Wells family and for Nolan, and they want justice for all Black children who are missing, who have been killed, who have been lynched, and those stories have been completely swept under the rug. We want justice for Nolan. We want justice for all of the Black people who have been killed, who have been lynched, who have been missing and still haven't been found. We want justice for all of those individuals. And I'm so happy that Ben Crump is on this case. And so I really hope that people are taking it seriously. I mean, at first, no one was covering the story. Black people were covering the story, but mainstream media was not covering the story until very recently. So I'm very happy that this is getting the attention that it deserves. So we will be keeping our eyes locked on this case. So we're going to be talking about this until we get all of the answers that clear up what happened to Nolan Wells. So rest in peace, Nolan Wells. This is just incredibly tragic. And I really hope that justice is served. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Power, Policy, and Progress with Madison Maynard. I really hope that you enjoyed today's discussion. Please tune in on Thursday. We will be back with more political news, analysis, and conversations about the issues shaping our nation. In the meantime, make sure to follow me on Instagram, follow me on TikTok for online content. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications. That's incredibly important to turn on your notifications so you know when I post and you never miss an episode. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please follow, subscribe, rate the podcast, preferably 5 stars to show support. People are not rating the podcast. People need to rate the podcast. Please rate it 5 stars. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rate 5 stars or rate whatever you feel, compelled to do. Of course, free country, free will. However, I would prefer 5 stars. Thank you. So please do so. Please follow, subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe on YouTube. Please like, share. Please do all of the things and join in on the conversation. Please leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts on today's topics. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for listening. I'm Madison Maynard, and you're listening to Power, Policy, and Progress. I'll see you next time.